Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Leadership Speak series. It's my pleasure to welcome my senior and colleague from Infosys, Gopal Devanahalli, to this episode of Leadership Speak series. Hello, Gopal.
Hi Ringo, good to meet you.
Thank you so much for finding the time to speak with us. And so, without further ado, I'd like you to give us a little bit of a background about how you have transgressed from technology services to education to where you are today leading the charge on an interesting mission of taking education globally across the globe. So over to you, Gopal.
Sure. I totally have around 30 years of corporate experience. I've done different things across the years, Ringo, and currently I'm part of the Manipal group. It is a group which is focused on healthcare, education, and health insurance. I'm currently based in New York, and I am the CEO of Manipal Education Americas. We own a medical school called the American University of Antigua. Prior to that, I was a CEO of MeritTrack, which was an assessment company. I've also played roles in online, managing the online education platforms at Manipal. I've also spent a couple of years before that in the healthcare Manipal organization, where I was doing digital health and interesting opportunities like public-private partnership. Prior to that, like you said, Ringo, I spent 15 years at Infosys, did business development for many years in the US, spent a year in strategy in the corporate headquarters, worked in Infosys business process management, outsourcing, and my last part of my career there, I was in a new part of Infosys focused on developing products and platforms. Prior to Infosys, I spent 7 years in Kotak Bank, which used to be a finance company those days, and everything from corporate finance, consumer finance to investment banking. So yeah, it's been a long thing. I'm also currently a board member of Infosys BPM, which is a subsidiary of Infosys. I've been doing this for the last 2 years. So yeah, that's another thing that I've been doing. And from my education perspective, I've done I've done my management from IIM Calcutta, and before that from BITS Pilan. So that's a very quick synopsis of me.
Quick and very illustrious and very enviable. I mean, what a track record. You have moved from banking to technology to healthcare to education. So, as you know, this group is primarily, I'm trying to see if I can get, insights from leaders like yourselves on your experiences in leadership and being a different kind of leader, more entrepreneurial in your approach. So, what has been your experience so far, Gopal, in all of these organizations? They're all marquee brands, and so what has been your learning as a leader, and how have you evolved as a leader over these 30 plus years?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rigo. I kind of will put it into three, four buckets. I think the most important thing of a leader is on talent. So initially, interestingly, as soon as I joined Kotak, I was managing a team which kind of grew over a period of time. It was a large team. But then when I joined Infosys, for the first 2, 3 years, I was an individual contributor. So straight away from managing people, I became an individual contributor. Then I had a small team in sales. But what I realized there was to deliver to the client, it's not just about your direct reports. You got to work with several other people to deliver, to your client. And that experience is what I got there as to how do you bring people from different departments and organizations to work with you, to come together, align with having common interests, and make sure that you're delivering what you have to do for the client. So that was a big thing for me from a talent perspective. So a lot of people think talent leadership is all over. Oh, everybody needs to report to me. I think those days are gone. We're living in an economy where it's people, different teams. You're going to work across. You will probably work with people who are not even part of your organization. How do you get the best out of them? How do you influence them? Is something that I think I've learned over my career. So that's one very important thing. The other other bucket I would say, Ringo, is that initially it was about knowing about your product, my service, when I pitch it to clients, when I pitch it to customers, talking about it. But as I moved in my career, it's not just about that. It is about figuring out what is happening in the industry. If you really want to add value to the conversation with a prospective client or a customer, they just don't want to know what your sales pitch about your product and offering. They want to know more from you. So I had to start developing that. Have a point of view about the industries that I was in, look at different perspectives, be able to bring that into the conversation. And that was another key thing. As to in leadership, you've got to you got to have a wider range of thoughts that you got to bring to the table. So that was another big learning. So whether it's technology, how technology impacts industry, how digital is disrupting it. That was in my case, but in somebody else's case, it could be something else. So that was the second bucket, I would say. The third bucket I would put is that, as I got opportunities to lead independent, P&Ls and businesses, that's when you realize that you need to obviously have a strategic planning thought process. You got to plan, 3 years, 4 years and ahead, and you got to have a plan based on that. But at the same time, execution focus is critical, because you got to execute on that plan on a daily basis. Many people think that a leader's role looks very sexy from outside, that it's all about planning and all that good stuff, but actually a lot of it is operational details. You got to get into the weeds. You got to make sure that things are happening. So maybe one day of strategy, but 99 days of execution.
Very well said. Yeah.
That's something that I think I learned over a period of time. And finally, I think what I learned was it's very important to deliver in that role. What I mean by that is, we get into this mode of past glory, Ringo. As we all, grow in our careers, we think, oh, I've done so well in the previous, assignment. Now, the company needs to take care of me, and even if I don't do well, what's wrong? They have to ensure they have to give me better assignments. They have to give me a promotion. They have to pay me more. So it's all about we get into this thing about it's looking at our past story, but it's not about that. It is in that role. Are you delivering? I think that is very, very critical, and that's something that otherwise it's going to be painful for you, for anyone, right? You'll get into that mindset, and that's something you need to avoid.
So you made an interesting observation, Gopal. When you mentioned that when you came from Kotak to Infosys, you were leading a team, and then you became an individual contributor. And you were fairly young then. So did you see that? How do you see that as? Did you see yourself as a leader still, or what was the change you had to make in terms of your mindset when you had less delegation, deployment, and management of others' performance?
Right.
Was it better for you? Was it a detriment for you?
So initially, like I said, it was a difficult switch. Suddenly you had to do everything yourself. You had to go and get your printouts. You had to go and prepare your own presentations, and nobody else is going to do it for you. So it's all about that. But that's when I realized that it's not about the people you manage, but it's about people whom you may not be directly managing, but who you can bring together and make something happen for our clients. In that particular case, it was about selling to large retail companies about our offerings. And I couldn't do it on my own. You had to bring in other people. You had to put it all together. And how do you influence that? Because they have competing interests. They're doing other things, right? So how do you bring it all together is a big learning for me. So it is not about just having your own people directly reporting to you. Was a big learning for me.
So yeah, I mean, I think most struggle, right, when the dimensions or the dynamics change. Sometimes you get, like you said, living on past glory. What worked for you, so you had to constantly adapt. I guess one of the things that I'm kind of picking up from your what you've described, you constantly adapted your leadership style and your leadership, let's say, focus to be able to stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with you there also, Rico, because in Infosys, as you know, it's a very large company. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. From there, when I moved into the Manipal group, it was a much smaller company compared to Infosys, and the processes were different. You had to adapt yourself to working in a very different scenario, not only from a market and an industry perspective, but from a within the company perspective also. So how do you adapt yourself? I could have taken the thing that, I'm from Infosys, you guys have to just listen to what I have to say. That's not going to work, right? So you got to adapt to the situation there. And that's what I mean when I say you can't live on your past glory.
Very well said, and that kind of helps me segue into my next question. So, Infosys, you saw it from being probably when we were there, probably $100+ million revenue to multi-billion-dollar corporation, right?
Right.
So you saw it from being quasi-entrepreneurial to being a large corporate.
Hmm.
So a very interesting learning. So when you came back to Meditrack and Manipal, uh, I guess the role became more entrepreneurial again.
Right.
So what has been your experience when became more of an entrepreneurial leader? What was the learnings and what were the adjustments you made as a leader?
Yeah. So I think one thing which I want to just mention, Ringo, is that Infosys, and this is, I think, true of all large companies from my experience, that even in a large company, there are entrepreneurial, you need to have an entrepreneurial mindset to succeed. What I mean by that is even at Infosys, when, like you said, when we joined, it was $100 million, but it was growing so fast that we were launching new products, new markets, new services, and therefore you had to be entrepreneurial. I was part of the first industry group that got created, first as a pilot in the retail sector.
Okay.
And we were part of the leadership team that created that. And we had to be completely entrepreneurial. We had to do things which the rest of Infosys was not doing. So we
Very
had,
interesting.
for example, come up with what we called at that time business solutions, whereas we were typically selling technology solutions. So we had to do things very differently from the rest of the company, and therefore you had to be entrepreneurial.
Mm-hmm.
So similarly, when we created later on, when I got into the products and platforms group, that again was a new thing for Infosys,
Very
completely,
true.
and it was entrepreneurial. So the first point I want to make is that even in a large company, there are a lot of things, whether it's a new service that you're part of, a new product that you're part of, or a new market that you're part of. Those are all in a way entrepreneurial because you're doing that. And then, of course, when sorry, you were saying something.
No, I mean that's continue. I'll ask my questions later.
Sure. So then, like you said, after that, when I moved into the Manipal group, you're right, absolutely right. So that was a much different kind of an entrepreneurial experience for me. But I had kind of got used to it because I had, in a way, done different things at Infosys, had been doing it. So I would say the shift was slightly better for me. And I could get into this mindset where here it was about, how do you get things done quickly? How do you make sure that you're launching products and services fast? The decision making had to be much more rapid. So in a way, I got a little bit of training of that at Infosys, and then I was able to get into my roles, I think, in Manipal.
Absolutely. And the question I was asking is, when you mentioned about your little pockets of entrepreneurial approaches,
Hmm.
was it, how did you cope with they were conflicting. There was a large corporates who were working in a certain style and fashion, and you had to approach it differently.
Uh,
Uh, so it also kind of moves into my next question, which is what were the challenges when you were as a leader and as an entrepreneurial leader? What
right.
challenges did you face, and how did you kind of overcome them?
Yeah.
And also, same goes for Manipal. To like your
Sure.
opinions on that.
So I would say from what you need, first of all, in that role that you asked, right? What was it when the rest of the organization does things differently? I think first of all, the skill sets that were required was quick decision making ability, agility in the processes that you establish were critical because you had to be able to switch things fast. You had to have the ability to try out things. Some will work, some will not work. Like I remember even during the Infosys days when we were doing it, we launched many solutions. Some worked, some did not work. So that was the kind of approach one has to take. You need to build your team, therefore, according to that. So your team for that role, for that assignment, needs to be kind of different based on that. You need to, and most importantly, Ringo, you need to have backup. Even in a large company, I think that was the point you were getting at. So you need to have a backup. If you're on your own, then the backup has to be financial. But if you're in a large company, you need to have someone who believes in that. There has to be a sponsor for that.
Mm-hmm.
Give you some runway of maybe whatever number of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are going to be a lot of people who say, "Oh, this is too small. Or why are we doing this? This is not our bread and butter." So there'll be a lot of naysayers. So unless you have someone who's going to back you up, some sponsor for this, it's going to be extremely hard. just like in the outside world, in a startup world, you need to have a sponsor in terms of you have to have money, you have to have startups, investors. Somewhat similar, I would say you need to have that in the large company. But I want to make one important point, Ringo. My belief is that today's world, most industries are getting disrupted as we know because of technology
Mm-hmm.
and digital and AI and all of that. So every industry is getting disrupted. So every company is changing, needs to change what they do, whether it's this the way they deliver services, products. So I think it is very important that they have leaders who have that entrepreneurial mindset. So I
Excellent.
think what you're doing in terms of this kind of a program, therefore, is very critical because it's not just about startups. I think even in large companies, small companies, mid-sized companies, you need to have people who can have that entrepreneurial mindset because the industries are getting disrupted all the time.
And it's music to my ears. Thank you, Gopal.
Yeah.
And I think the reason I reached out to leaders like yourselves is because you bring a wealth of experience in different facets, right? And like they say, everyone has their own share of challenges, right? Just because you're large doesn't mean your challenges are larger too.
Yeah.
If in an entrepreneurial setup, the challenges are smaller, but proportionally they're equally daunting. So
Right.
the learnings can be probably. I'm hoping that at the end of all of this, not during this whole journey, we are able to learn from each other. And if there is even one insight which helps some of us, it's I think invaluable. So yeah, and I think that you make a very good point that learning constantly from each other would immensely help, and especially in a let us say, non-social setting. It's more a quasi. It's more about trying to learn from each other. More academic slash professional is really where I want to kind of say my confluence is.
Right.
So, what other challenges did you
Yeah.
face as a leader and entrepreneur, Gopal?
Yeah. So going back to the question on challenges, therefore, Ringo, I think from my experience, I think the biggest challenge was in different assignments I did was about growth in the market, right? So how do you grow in the market? Because if you don't grow, then it's going to be extremely difficult to have your backer will at some point in time lose interest, and so how do you grow? And whether it's B2B businesses or whether it's B2C businesses, that is very, very critical. And you have to, like I said, show growth to get more backing. And if you get more, initially you need some backing to get the growth, right? So it's a
Yes, it's a chicken and the egg all the time, right?
right. So that's the balance, and how do you maintain that balance? So I've had cases where we haven't had enough growth, or the market has turned around on us, and therefore the interest has been lost by the sponsors. So it happens, right? So both, and of course, so how do you handle that? How do you so in a way, you're as a leader, you also have to be able to tell the story, and be able to tell why this is the future is going to be brighter, or why that things are going to be different. So that storytelling is very, very critical as an entrepreneurial leader that you'll have to keep doing. But going back to the challenges, I think that's one critical challenge. Actually, on growth, let me just say one more thing. Just take customer acquisition costs in B2C businesses. Like in our case, EdTech is a B2C business, and similarly of other internet companies in India, the customer acquisition costs were very high, and because the consumer behavior of buying online, doing things online was not there, and that changed during COVID. Suddenly, the behavior of consumers have completely changed in the last 2 years because of they were forced to do things online, right? In India, for the last maybe couple of years, the growth in online education has been stupendous, and that's been because there was no choice, that people had to study online, and they got used to it. So the consumer behavior has changed, and therefore your customer acquisition costs have dropped. But earlier, like I said, the challenge is how do you get more customers at a profitable way is one of the key, I would say, challenges, especially in a B2C business, and it's probably true even in a B2B business. How do you get customers without losing money? So that's something very important. I would say the other challenge that I faced was regulatory challenges, because in certain markets, like I'll give you the healthcare market. When in India in 2014-15, we were trying to do teleconsulting on a large scale, which is very common now, right, Ringo? But that time, I'm just giving you that as an example.
It was very very novel those days.
Yeah,
Nobody had heard of it.
yeah. So we were trying to do that, but interestingly, the law was not allowing that in India. Right? It was not cut and dry, right? It said that the doctor has to physically examine a patient before they give a prescription. So we had to figure out how to do that carefully. So regulatory challenges, especially for an entrepreneur, where they're trying to do new things, and it might go against established norms and rules, is one of the biggest challenges, I think. How do you navigate that carefully? So that's another challenge that I would say. And then the final challenge is that if you're in a low growth situation for whatever reason, right? Supposing you get stuck in that for a couple of years, that particular industry that you're in is not doing well, or for example, so financial services industry, take a classic example. After the crash in 2009-10, for 3-4 years, it was really not doing well, right? So supposing you were in that industry, and how do you therefore motivate your team is another big challenge, I think, right? When it's a low growth situation, because it happens, even if you're doing well, you might still be in a low growth situation. How do you motivate your team? How do you keep them engaged? How do you so is also an important thing. So I would say these are the top challenges that I faced, and have learned to deal with them over a period of time.
Excellent. And I'm assuming that your learnings from all of these sectors and organizations have been fungible. You were able to draw from each other to learn.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. Because some of these things you will learn, but at the same time, I think I go back to my earlier point that at that moment, in that context, finally you have to do, you have to deliver in that scenario, right? So you can't again think, oh, I did this in the past like this. That's important.
Excellent. So my last question for our session is, Gopal, what would your advice be to young leaders, aspiring entrepreneurs? What would your advice and suggestion be?
Yeah, from my learning in corporate life over the years, the first thing for me has been you have to be client or consumer obsessed as a young leader. So that is critical, right? If your service to your client after you've sold the product needs to be excellent, if it's not, then you're going to, mid-term to long-term, you're going to lose business. So that focus has to be, that customer orientation needs to be driven. Everything else, in my view, should be based around the customer. The way you organize yourself, the way you're structured, in my view, has to be customer based or consumer based or client based. So that I feel is a big thing that I would advise young people. The second key thing is kind of related to that, but more from a sales perspective. I think sales is critical. And I've met a lot of great entrepreneurs who've got some very good ideas, but they've not been able to monetize that idea. And therefore, how do you so ability to monetize that product or service, and that requires some great sales talent. So that's something that is critical, and that needs to be focused on, especially during the early stages of it. And related to that is, I've had cases where if you hire the wrong person in a sales role, and you realize it after 6 months, and you want to let that person go, but it's not just at that point, you've also lost that 6 months. The opportunity cost of the 6 months is too much to kind of not think of. So you have to really be careful about who you bring into those roles, and that's also very important in my view. The third thing I kind of related to that I would advise is that you probably need different teams at different points in time. So in an early stage, you might require a different kind of a team. Later on, you will require more operational, for example, strength to run operations extremely well. So initially, so you have to construct your team as you go, as a journey of that division or startup or whatever. The team requirements will change over a period of time. So that's another thing that I would advise. Another very critical thing I feel is that our behavior as humans, our psychology, is that we get into this trap of fallacy of sunken cost, right? So we are, once we've invested effort in something, either a new business or new startup or new product, or within that you've invested in some person that you think is really a great person, and then even though the evidence is kind of saying that, look, you need to cut your losses, you need to stop and move on, it's very difficult to pivot or to shut down things. So we should, and this is human psychology, so you should at least be aware of this fallacy of our thinking, that we think we cannot think of sunken costs so easily, and therefore maybe you should talk to others from outside, get periodic perspectives from other people, and listen to others, because you won't be able to make decisions in some of those areas. That's my another piece of advice. And final advice, I think, is you is that you need to enjoy what you're doing. Ultimately, that's a critical thing, right? So you need to really
Beautifully said. Yes.
enjoy what you're doing. That's the final thing.
That's very very important, because I guess most of the dissatisfaction in corporate world is you're doing what you don't want to do, and yet you do it because you feel there's another option, which is unfortunate for both the organization and for the employee, that you're doing something which you're not excited about.
Right.
But thank you so much for the insight, and thank you for your time, Gopal. It's a pleasure as always to catch up with you, and I wish you all success at Manipal and all of your other endeavors. And so I'm hoping that we'll have more of these discussions. And this is just early days for this group. I might want your participation in other forums and other discussions that we might have. So I'm going to take the liberty of you being my senior, of volunteering you for future conversations.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ringo. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank
Bye.
you, Gopal.